Cult of the Lamb is a mashup between genres including roguelite, dungeon crawler, and management sim all rolled into one. As a lamb, you were sacrificed before becoming a sheep, and upon your death, you meet the one who waits in limbo. You're given a second chance to cheat death and come back by taking on a demonic deal, which requires you to defeat 4 bishops in 4 different biomes. Here is our review for Cult of the Lamb on Nintendo Switch. Heading into the game, my assumption was that it was going to be a pretty even balance between the rogue and the management aspect of the game, but instead, Cult of the Lamb leans much more into cult management, and this isn't a bad thing as it is very fun, original, and well laid out with milestones constantly guiding you. Early on, when your cult is smaller, the balance of time is fairly even, but the bigger your cult gets, the more attention it requires, and by the end of the game, it occupies much more of your time. The reason the management aspect works so well is because at any time you can give yourself a break and go raiding dungeons, and if you're not feeling up for some combat, try a game of Knucklebones instead, the original and addicting dice minigame, or you can even go fishing. Surprisingly, the management aspect was very enjoyable coming from someone who isn't the biggest fan of management sim. You don't have to sacrifice followers, you can re-educate them. You don't have to feed them gruel, you can cook them some nice meals. You also don't have to make them work through the night. There are many different ways to approach your job as leader of this cult. Back to your list of duties, there are 3 basic pillars to keeping your cult happy: hunger, faith, and cleanliness, and Cult of the Lamb will have you constantly spinning these plates to keep everybody happy. As for the roguelite parts of the game, you explore dungeons to increase your resources to expand your cult, which in turn makes you stronger for future runs. The different biomes, the procedurally generated rooms, and the game letting you decide your path in a Slay the Spire style roadmap all add into a roguelite that doesn't feel much like a roguelite. Most runs average around 10 to 15 minutes, which is very refreshing compared to some recent genre entries that have runs lasting well over an hour. It wouldn't be fair if we didn't talk about the gorgeous art direction Cult of the Lamb has. From the obvious overall art style to the attention to detail with things like how your cult members now have flames reflecting in their eyes when praying for you after you upgrade to a burning shrine. These little details are everywhere in the game. Cult of the Lamb not only looks gorgeous, but it also sounds amazing too. The sound of each biome feels very distinct, the soundtrack is great, the garbled sound the NPCs make, and the dopamine cues that you get when a new chest opens or a new page gets added to your cult book are pitch perfect across the board. As for specific Nintendo Switch issues, there are definitely a few areas of concern. Cult of the Lamb tries to maintain a 30 FPS compared to the 60 FPS that everywhere else is getting, and I say trying to maintain because despite the art style not appearing to be too complex, frame stutters do happen from time to time when the action gets going. The major issue for me using an OLED Switch was that when playing docked and using a Switch Pro controller, the controls felt clunky and unresponsive as if the game was suffering from input lag. I played fast twitch games when docked, including Hades, Hollow Knight, and Celeste, all with no issues. Oddly enough, when playing in handheld, the controls felt much more responsive. Cult of the Lamb also comes to a complete standstill for a few seconds when the changeover of days happened, but it never crashed at this point. However, the game did crash on me 3 times during my 76 days as cult leader. Twice near the bosses, which obviously has a lot happening on screen, and once back at camp. Outside of the performance issues on the Switch, there are a few minor gameplay gripes. Some biomes can be a little too busy at times to the point of obstructing your view, especially when you're forced to play on handheld. When heading out to explore dungeons, your first room will always have a curse and a weapon, but there is only one of each and a few areas to change during your raiding. There have been many rogues over the past few years that have managed this a little better by providing more options, allowing you to approach the game as you choose. Back at camp, there's some gripes as well. It would be nice if there was a bit more clarity across the board. When assigning a cult member to a task and selecting them from the list, it doesn't tell you what the member is doing, and this can sometimes lead to you removing them from another job. When building new items for your camp, it would also be nice to know if it required resources to operate and what kind. However, the biggest clarity issues is when creating a new doctrine. There are 5 categories to select from that give you a general idea of what you are about to do, including labor or faith, but after selecting, you are locked in with no going back. After selecting this category, you now have 2 doctrine options that are provided to you, and you are forced into making one of those choices. Considering how long it takes to earn the necessary means for a new doctrine, This sometimes feels counterintuitive to the way that you can customize your cult. Cult of the Lamb is a blend of genres, but surprisingly doesn't feel like any of them. It feels like its own product. Managing your cult never feels like a chore, and you're welcome to leave or explore dungeons at any time you wish. Exploring these dungeons also never feels much like a roguelite either, as you're always constantly moving in the right direction and you lose very minimal resources upon death. Cult of the Lamb has a very addictive quality, and it's very hard to put down as there's always one more little thing to do that requires your attention either back at camp or out in the dungeons. Switch performance is rough and is by far the worst place to play, but it's serviceable. Sadly, there is a great game underneath these issues, and hopefully with a few patches and updates, we will be able to see the game that Massive Monster envisioned. We're going to give Cult of the Lamb 2 scores. We'd first score it a soft 7 with its current Switch issues, but if there were no issues and just a 30 FPS that ran steady, we'd give Cult of the Lamb a strong 9.